Yo, what is up guys, Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So the return of Dmitry Bivol has been announced. Dmitry Bivol will return to the ring on the 11th of December and he will be taking on fellow Russian Umar Salamov. This actually takes place on a really good card, a good night of boxing in Russia on the 11th of December. Also on this card we have top super welterweight contender Magomed Kurbanov. He is taking on former WBO super welterweight champion Patrick Teixeira, so that's a big step up for him as well. That's a really good fight in its own right, but the card itself is actually looking really strong and I'm looking forward to this card, quite frankly. But let's talk briefly about Dmitry Bivol versus Umar Salamov. Considering what was available and the possible fights, I don't really have a problem with Dmitry Bivol facing Umar Salamov. The other champions, Joe Smith Jr. and Artur Beterbiev, they already have fights scheduled. And, you know, Umar Salamov is a good contender. Funnily enough, he's actually the mandatory challenger for the WBO light heavyweight title, which is held by Joe Smith. So Dmitry Bivol is actually fighting Joe Smith Jr.'s mandatory. He's taking care of that for him. And I think that's a good thing, really, because Umar Salamov, stylistically, I believe he would have given Joe Smith Jr. a real hard fight. And I think he'll give Dmitry Bivol a tricky fight. So far, Umar Salamov hasn't proven himself at the elite level at light heavyweight. In fact, a few years ago, he actually had a surprise defeat in Australia to Damien Hooper, but he's rebounded quite well from that and he's on a win streak now. His record is 26-1. 19 of his 26 wins come by way of knockout. If you look at his resume, I've seen this guy fight a few times and he's beaten the Ghanaian light heavyweight Emmanuel Anim. Now if you remember him, he basically took Lyndon Arthur life and death, and you know, Umar Salamov comprehensively outboxed Emmanuel Anim over 10 rounds. Emmanuel Anim has also beaten former light heavyweight title challenger Dudu Ngumbu. He's beaten Bob Ajasafe, who is familiar with us UK fans. So he's beaten guys who are tough, durable, but not necessarily world class. But when I look at Umar Salamov's attributes and certain things he does, I do believe that he will give some guys at the top of the light heavyweight division some tricky moments. First and foremost, much like Maxim Vlasov, he's a really tall, rangy light heavyweight. He's actually listed as 6'3.5", and he's got a 76-inch reach. So he's tall and long, he likes to utilise that jab, obviously, and everything good really comes off that jab. He's got a nice right hand behind it, which he can vary. He can throw it straight, he can throw it around the guard, and that right hand is primarily where his power lies, and that is the danger punch. I think primarily Maxim Vlasov is best at range. That's where his best work comes from, and that is when he tends to hurt people, but he can mix it up at times. He can fight at mid-range, he can throw some nice hooks to the body and throw some nice combinations when he has to, but primarily I would describe him as an outside fighter. A little bit like Maxim Vlasov, he is kind of herky-jerky, a little bit hard to read, and against a traditional boxer who relies on his rhythm like Dmitry Bivol, I think that could give Bivol some problems, you know, with the range, with the herky-jerky motions, etc. I think Umar Salamov's style might actually throw off Dmitry Bivol to a certain extent. We actually saw Bivol kind of struggle at times with Craig Richards' height and reach. I see Umar Salamov as a much more dangerous light heavyweight than Craig Richards. He's certainly got more power, and I think his style is less basic. He's more, like I said, he's more herky-jerky. He's got a weird rhythm to his style, so I can see Umar Salamov giving Dmitry Bivol some real trouble, and I don't anticipate Dmitry Bivol looking good in this fight. Ultimately, I'm intrigued to see how Umar Salamov gets on at the elite level. I've seen Umar Salamov now for a number of years, and I've always been intrigued by him, but I've never really been sure what to make of him, quite frankly. But against Dmitry Bivol on the 11th of December, we'll find out how good Umar Salamov is. Now, again, I do expect Dmitry Bivol to win this fight, but I don't expect him to look good, and I certainly don't expect him to stop Umar Salamov. I think, from what I've seen so far, Umar Salamov seems to have a pretty good chin. In fact, I would say Umar Salamov might be the more dangerous puncher going into this fight. So yeah, all in all, I'm actually quite satisfied with this opponent for Dmitry Bivol. I mean, it was being speculated that Bivol was going to fight John Ryder. Now, I rate John Ryder quite highly, but he's not a light heavyweight. Umar Salamov is a much better opponent than John Ryder, and it's good to see Bivol get a decent standard of opponent. One thing about Dmitry Bivol that I've had an issue with, in recent years, the man has been very inactive. He's only had one fight this year, for example. He never fought in 2020. He's been super inactive, so it's good to see Umar Salamov back, and it's good to see him get a good opponent, because in Bivol's last couple of performances, I've noticed some stagnation, and to me he's not looked as impressive. His rhythm doesn't look the same, his timing doesn't look the same, and he just doesn't look as sharp as he did previously. So yeah, I think this is the perfect fight for Dmitry Bivol, and as far as I'm concerned, he needs to be much better than he was against Craig Richards, against Umar Salamov. I see Salamov as a better light heavyweight than Craig Richards. In fact, I think Salamov he's a better opponent than what Joe Smith Jr. is fighting in Callum Johnson. So I'm satisfied by this opponent for Dmitry Bivol, and I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to see how this one goes down. I really like the card. As I mentioned, Magomed Kurbanov is fighting Patrick Teixeira on the same card. I'm imagining that's going to be some kind of eliminator. Both are super high ranked in the WBO. So this is a really good card in Russia. Anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Delboy. Peace.